Star Wars, best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, a UK-based Star Wars podcast with in-depth discussions and analysis sprinkled with some silliness. I am the Geordie Jedi Pete.
And I'm Kat Rysielka.
And we are back again covering the brand new season of Andor. It is, of course, the second and final season of Andor. Our last episode, we reviewed episodes 1, 2, and 3 of this awesome season. And then today we're going to be reviewing episodes 4, 5, and 6. But before we dive into those, I just want to go straight to you, Kat. Obviously, you weren't with us when we sort of deep dived, reviewed the first 3 episodes, the first arc of this season. So pressure's on, but because I know we had prepared for 4, 5, and 6. But just what were your overall thoughts on 1, 2, and 3, and sort of how has it lived up to expectations, and how excited are you for the rest of the series?
I thought those opening episodes set up so much in the sense of the tone and the character portrayal for the second season, because I really felt that those initial 3 episodes were really focusing on how sacrifice was so important for the beginning of the rebellion. Every character was going through some kind of sacrifice to either protect themselves or to help the rebellion. And it really reminded me of Luthen's speech at the end of season 1, where he says about how he has sacrificed everything for a sunrise he will never see. And it felt that way with those initial 3 episodes. There was a darkness to them, some of the darkest Star Wars we've had, not just visually, but tonally as well. And there were some very shocking moments. There were some very dark moments. But it really captured this galaxy on the cusp of war. How no matter these characters we love, like Bix and Brasso, trying to keep their heads down, trying to keep one step ahead of the Empire, it just won't work. The Empire is too wide, too vast, and they will find you no matter where you hide. Jyn Erso said in Rogue One, it doesn't matter if you don't look up, if you don't see the Imperial flags. But it felt like in those initial episodes that it really did matter. It didn't matter whether you were on an Outer Rim world just farming. The Empire was there, and it's this omnipresent rule of the Empire that was really captured in those first 3 episodes. So I was on the edge of my seat just from the beginning with those. They were a little slower than I think the most recent episodes, but that's because they had so much to set up. There had been the year gap already and a lot of explaining to do for that time frame. But yeah, I really enjoyed them.
Yeah, I think they certainly were full of tension, and the tension was sort of built gradually. And I thought in those first 3 episodes we did get a bit of comedy when obviously Cassian's dealing with the sort of the childlike rebel unit he meets on Yavin, and that's sort of how they're interacting. But other than that, the comedy was sort of toned right down, I thought. And then we obviously end with the biggest tension of all, I suppose, with Cassian escaping without one of his, found family, sadly. And then, of course, we also, I suppose the biggest question I have for you is, are you on Team Mon? Are you going to be dancing in a nightclub like Mon?
Who wouldn't want to be Team Mon? That scene was incredible. That scene where she is literally spiraling through her dancing because inside she has got so much pain. There's so much chaos. She's trying to secretly lead and fund the rebellion, while around her, she's watching her daughter make sacrifices and enter into a loveless marriage simply for influence and money. She's watching her cousin having to go off to fight with Luthen. She's watching the Empire's grip on the Senate become ever tighter, and the pain that dancing portrayed was so well done. That character study where she is just throwing back shot after shot, trying to escape the reality she finds herself in. I thought the cinematography of that scene was incredible. And I would happily be there at that party. That party, considering the Chandrillans are all about um, power and portrayal and being high society. As soon as that disco ball came out, they knew how to party.
They certainly did. I think that's just how the rich do it. I think, but no, it was awesome. I think there's been some discourse. Star Wars, there's always discourse, isn't there? But about sort of the music, and I think the music set the scene. It was like party music, But I think as Mon sort of deteriorates more into sort of that inner anguish and sort of being unable to do anything about it right now, I thought the music sort of helped build the tension as well. So like I thought it was a good choice.
Definitely. I love the music because it was jarring. It was this party theme. It felt far too upbeat for what Mon Mothma was going through. And I think that contrast through the sound, through the music was so important. And it also helped contrast then with Cassian on Yavin 4, where it was near silence, apart from the shouting and the shooting between the rebel factions. So I think that music was only adding to the tension and really setting apart tonally these two very tense scenes. Because even though the wedding on Chandrila didn't appear as tense as what Cassian is going through on Yavin 4, there is still that same level of tension because while Mon Mothma's life wasn't at risk, she is losing her daughter in a sense. So I think there is just as much at stake for Mon Mothma as there is for Cassian. And that party music was a wonderful way to distinguish these two scenes that were happening and interplaying one another at the same time.
And of course, it's not just her daughter, but also, her childhood friend Tay. Although it's been quite tense between them, this season, but we see sort of Luthen looking to take care of that anywhere he sees fit, and Mon has to just sort of go along with that. And we don't know, but it's probably going to be him getting killed, I imagine, and she's sort of just got to let that happen, even though she's against it. So there's a lot going on for Mon to deal with. Let's move on to obviously the next arc. So what was great was obviously season one sort of finished, and then the first arc of this season was 1 year later, hence why the episode was called 1 year later. And then on the first episode of this arc, so episode 4, we get 1 year later again. And there's 1 year between each of these arcs, I believe. The first arc was directed by Ariel Kleiman, and then he is back to do these three here. But we've had a change of writer. The first three were written by series creator Tony Gilroy, but then Bu Willimon, famous for House of Cards on Netflix, writes this arc. And the first episode 4 of this arc, is Ever Been To Ghorman. So straight away we're getting Ghorman in the title. These 3 episodes we're going to talk about aired on April 29th, 2025. So everybody should have seen them, but if you have not seen them, pause the podcast, go watch them on Disney Plus, then come back. Otherwise, you're going to have everything spoiled for you. If you are an absolute crazy person and you love having it spoiled for you first, then go ahead and keep listening before you watch. But yeah, 1 year after the incident on Maya Rao, Cassian and Bix have become active operators for Luthen in the hideout on Coruscant. Bix is still beset with nightmares of Ghost, who was, of course, the ISB scientist / doctor who tortured her in season 1. On Ghorman, the Empire begins building an armory. Cyril, with Deidre and Partagaz's backing, takes up a position on Palmor, which is the capital city of Ghorman, and he sort of pretends to be sympathetic to the local rebels' cause, to sort of feign being successfully recruited by them. Upon learning from Jung that Deidre is secretly working on the planet, Luthen sends Cassian to assess the rebels. Wilmon is tasked with teaching Saw Gerrera's lieutenant, Pluty, how to configure a machine that extracts rhydonium that is a fuel source for the Empire starships, and they plan to steal the rhydonium, probably A, to hinder the Empire, but also to power his own ships as well. And Mon back on Coruscant, and she is unsuccessful. She attempts to rally support to kill a renewal of a bill, which gives broad power to the ISB, which is, of course, the Imperial Security Bureau. So we jump forward 1 year later from sort of the tragedy of the last episode, which was sort of Mon knowing that she's probably lost her friend Tay, and her daughter is now married off, just so the rebellion can live. And obviously the tragedy of Cassian losing Brazo. It's heavily felt, but here we are 1 year later. The guys have sort of, I wouldn't say moved on. I think the effects of the past are still with these guys, but it's powering them on, which is good, and they're more committed to the cause, you could say. So, what was your thoughts on this episode being 1 year later? Was it jarring, and what were your thoughts on us finally seeing the planet Ghorman?
No, I'm not finding these time jumps jarring whatsoever. I think the writers have done an exceptional job at making these jumps, one, make sense, but two, they just feel like the story is progressing at quite a fast rate, which, as we're discovering the early stages of the rebellion, that fits within that theme, because Luthen is trying to correlate as much information as he can to help the cause. Mon Mothma is trying to rally allies behind her to fund and fuel the rebellion. Meanwhile, you have these different rebel cells and guerrilla fighting units actively working against the Empire, and all of that has to snowball at quite a fast pace. So I'm finding the time jumps really interesting, if anything, and not jarring. It's not often that a show can do time jumps so well, but I think Andor season 2 is really proving that it can be done as long as the episodes are written well and that the time jumps are justified. In this opening, I think it did feel justified, because what it really highlighted was, for me, especially in this episode, now that Bix has been through so much trauma between Ghost and the events on Mina Rao, she is alone when Cassian is out on a mission. She's alone on Coruscant, and that's really affecting her PTSD symptoms. She's got no support network, she's got no friends, she's very isolated, and that's taking its toll on her. Meanwhile, Cassian, as he's becoming so active as an operative for Luthen, he's having to make more and more harsh choices. He's having to become quite callous, and you're starting to see the toll that's taking on him. While he and Bix have these lovely, soft moments, you can also see the paranoia building, the worry, the constantly being on edge because the Empire is only just a step behind. And that kind of tension couldn't have been built up without that time jump, really, because it takes time for the effect of paranoia and worry to really cement itself into your everyday life and actions. And I think that's what this episode really captured so well.
No, it certainly did. Obviously, we see quite a lot of Coruscant in this arc. We're used to Coruscant in the prequel trilogy, obviously. This Coruscant, it is definitively Coruscant, but I do feel it's lost some of its color. And I feel some of that's partly because they're sort of trying to use sort of real sets and sort of less CGI. I think it is less colourful, but I also think it's a sign of like the Empire is very grey and sort of dull, and obviously where the city was once vibrant. That sort of that vibrancy's been taken away as sort of the ISB look to control everything. I don't know what your thoughts were on sort of the obvious choice to sort of change the colour palette of Coruscant.
No, I definitely agree on that because the lower levels of Coruscant that we've seen have always been colourful. Neon lights, party music, and this sense of being lived in. There's graffiti, there's posters, whether that's in the prequels or during the Clone Wars or Bad Batch when we've seen Coruscant previously. And I think it definitely highlights the rule of the Empire on Coruscant, how it's changed. There's a brutalism to the architecture, the new buildings, even that block of flats that Cassian and Bix are hiding out in. Everything is just so grey and sterile. It feels all carbon copies of each other, which to me was a really great contrast to Gorman because Coruscant, the heart of the Empire in a way, because it is the core world of the galaxy. The Empire has basically assimilated all of those top levels to its idea of uniformity and this just grey expanse. Whereas Gorman, who as a planet is far more embedded in its culture, its values, its defying imperial rule, so much more colourful and organic feeling. Whereas Coruscant just feels so sterile now. There's no character almost to Coruscant, which came across amazingly in the sets. Whether that was the exterior city shots or even Bix and Cassian's home, even Deidre's home was just felt like something out of an IKEA catalogue.
No, it certainly did. It was very sort of sterilized, wasn't it? I think, which I think is what the Empire's trying to do. So, very good choices there. I thought anyway. Obviously, we see Coruscant and we see Gorman, as we've said. Sort of highlighted those places. We also see Saw Gerrera and the planet he is on. Were you excited to learn that this is, of course, the planet, the same place as the Resistance base in the Star Wars sequels? Dakar, I believe it's called.
Absolutely, I loved seeing Dakar because I think it's mentioned in the Force Awakens visual dictionary that Leia had deliberately chosen Dakar because she knew there was a old rebel base there that hadn't been found by the Empire. So for it to then be a Saw Gerrera related base, that was such a cool callback and just embeds the location even further into the lore. But no, I was very excited when I saw it.
It was very exciting. It was great to see X-Wing sort of parked where, I think these are T60 X-Wings, if that's correct. I think where we see the T65s later, we'll pull down style X-Wing in the sequels. And I don't know if it's mentioned here, but later on we learn that sort of the partisans and Saw sort of leave the base, never to come back, which is probably why it's never detected. But it does look like the Resistance do fortified a bit more than it is in this process. What are your thoughts on sort of Saw Gerrera and his relationship, with Wilmon?
I think all three of these episodes touch upon it, but especially the scenes with Saw Gerrera. It's bringing to light these different ideologies of the potential different leaders of the rebellion. Because Mon Mothma cares about people. Yes, she knows that she's trying to build a rebellion and she's trying to build an army, but she cares about people. Whereas Saw Gerrera does not. He sees people as tools, he sees people as weapons. And that came across in every interaction he had with Wellman. There was this almost cruelty to the way Saw Gerrera was treating him. And it does make sense for Saw Gerrera's character. He is much more guerrilla fighter. The ends justify the means. No sacrifice is too great because he believes that's what war is. I mean, this is a man who lost his sister. This is a man who lost his planet. So I can understand why he is the way that he is, but it doesn't make it any less shocking the way he treats people with basically no respect, no care, this callous, almost cruel outlook of that they're tools, and he's just using Wilman for his expertise with being able to crack into Rhydonium, but it's so much harsher to even Luthen cares more than Saw Gerrera.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think when you look at the rebellion, usually we see the rebellion leader as sort of, kind and caring. Obviously, Luthen has a bit of an edge, you could say. He knows how to push buttons to get things done, but overall, he does still have that bit of caring, I think. But I think this is where Saw has, I think when we've seen Saw in Star Wars Rebels, we've seen him where he's not quite the crazy Saw yet, but I think he's there at this point. Treating people how he wants to treat them. Just so he can achieve what he needs to achieve because he's hell bent on taking it to the Empire. What were your thoughts on sort of the? It wasn't mentioned loads, but obviously they've sort of subtly put in there that the renewal of the bill to give broader power to the ISB is sort of renewed again, and it's sort of this idea of Palpatine having full control of the Senate, even though I think if you remember in Revenge of the Sith, and sort of they talk about you have to keep the Senate intact to control the galaxy, but he's also manipulating the Senate at the right time, where the Senate are voting on things and doing what Palpatine wants. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on any of that.
I think it's very interesting to see the way that the Senate presents itself compared to the prequels. In The Phantom Menace, we have a Senate that represents the galaxy and all of these different voices. Whereas when Mon Mothma is trying to gain allies to fight back against this bill, the Pord Bill, I think it was called, everyone is concerned about what other senators will think, how it will reflect upon their allegiance, whether it will make them a target in the eyes of the ISB and potentially going against the Empire. In reality, the Senate is just a proxy because there is so much controlled. It's people who can speak up during the Senate's discussions, that's controlled, and we see or glimpse for a moment this oath that they're having to take in the name of the Empire and for Palpatine, which Mon Mothma doesn't complete because she realizes that it's complete garbage and goes against her own standing point. So that glimpse we do see of the Senate really just points out how powerless the senators are at this point, which I think is important to note because one, it shows how brave Mon Mothma is and Bail Organa to speak out constantly against the Emperor, but two, it helps to explain why more senators didn't try speaking out against Palpatine because they were either afraid, they were afraid for their people, or they just couldn't. They weren't given the chance to speak on that floor. So, in a way, it creates a little bit of empathy for the other senators as well.
Definitely. On a more of a funny note, how sad are you that we did not see his name's just vanished from my brain, but Palpatine's blue friend with the what's he called again?
Maz Meta.
Mazameta, that's the one. We didn't see him running the Senate. Someone else was there.
Yeah, that was a little surprising, but we do know he is like the Grand Vizier, so it could be that he is literally at the right hand of the Emperor, and he's not. He may only be present actually when Palpatine deems it fit for Maz Meta to be present, because I suppose it would be unrealistic to expect Maz Meta to be there for every Senate gathering. I mean, he's got to have a sick day at some point.
Certainly. Is there anything else from episode 4 that you want to cover that we haven't spoken about?
I think the only thing that I would sort of mention is just going back to Ghorman. What I did love about this entry into Ghorman and revealing the Ghorman culture is just how realistic it felt. The beauty of this planet and culture that they created, And I was just absolutely amazed when I learned that the showrunners had made the Gore language. Because when I was listening to it, I thought, is this Flemish that I'm hearing? But it's actually a completely made up language inspired by French with French phonetics. But it's not real. And I couldn't believe that because Gorman just felt so grounded in reality.
Yeah, I thought it was French at first. Like my mind was like, "Is this French?" And like upon looking at it, I was like, "No, it's not." But yeah, I think they got Gorman sort of spot on with the feel of it. And the Gormans being, should we say, a little bit like the French, where they are a little bit, they're very proud, which is good, but also maybe a little bit self-important, arrogant, maybe. And I think it doesn't mean they deserve what's going to happen to them, but I think it's probably why they end up getting in the situation they get in later. And I think the Empire sort of know how they're going to react and play them that way, but we'll talk about that as we get to it. The next episode is episode 5, that is I Have Friends Everywhere. Claire learns that Skulden intends to search his gallery room after one of his pieces turns out to be a forgery, threatening to expose the bug she planted in the room and forcing her to extract it during the upcoming party. Cassian connects with the Goblin rebels and learns they plan to intercept the weapons shipment, but he deems them too inexperienced and shoots down the plan, much to their frustration. Cyril reports back to Coruscant with news of the heist, and Portagaz and Deidre agree to let it go through to empower and control the rebels. Saw kills his Lieutenant Pluty after learning that he is the traitor, and sort of forces Wilman to work the extractor on the heist instead, which was very cold. Also calm and calculated from Saw, but it also just put more emphasis on the fact that, you are at the whim of Saw Gerrera, and I'm sure Pluty was actually a traitor, but who's to say it wouldn't just be paranoia and he's going to kill you anyway. But yeah, I mean, let's dive in and talk about sort of the big part of this episode is obviously the forgery that then exposes the bug that's planted in the room. Just talk us through what your thoughts were on this sort of, on all of the scenes related to this, and of course, we see Director Krennic interacting with some of our rebel friends here.
This scene or set of scenes was absolutely amazing because I loved how the party was almost this facade for the underlying tension. Because while everybody seems relaxed and everybody seems to be having a good time, this is a party where connections are being made, where people are watching each other. And it's quite interesting that the ISB officials are there mingling with the crowds, because while this might be the upper echelons of society, there's no real reason for the ISB to be invited. I mean, it might make more sense for perhaps some of the top naval officers because they typically have families that they might attend with, but the ISB have got the reputation. These are the people who lock you up and torture you. So for them to be as a party is quite the statement by the Empire of saying no matter how lavish or extravagant a party you host, no matter how much you try to drown your worries of alcohol or hide behind your rich ideals, we are still watching you. We are still here. We're infiltrating your everyday life. And that symbolism of the ISB being in at the event was very clever. I also loved it's Lonnie and Hertz who are having having cocktails, and Hurt is very much into those cocktails. He's enjoying the lucky break he's had to come to this party. But what this moment also demonstrated was, while Claire has been this source of information, she's been listening to all of these different channels for Luthen, we haven't really seen her on the front lines. She's been always in the shop, being an integral part of the team, But in the background, yeah, in this episode, I Have Friends Everywhere, she is at the forefront. She's at this party to get out the listening device so that Scaldon doesn't find out that they've been listening in all this time. And she threatens Lonnie with exposing him as a cheater to his family if he doesn't go along with this plan, which is a very cold move. And Cleo is willing to do anything to get this bug out. So it was interesting to see this other side of her where she can be this ruthless soldier on the front lines if she needs to be, manipulating Lonnie into helping her, because she's also risking Lonnie being exposed too. If anything had gone wrong during that extraction and the ISB realized that Lonnie was a double agent, that would be it for him and his family. So there is so much at stake during this party. Everyone else seems to be oblivious to it. But for this group of people who then enter into Scaldon's private room to see this exhibit of artifacts from across the galaxy, the stakes and the tension couldn't be higher. I feel we say this about every episode, but honestly, they do leave you on the edge of your seat because there is no way to predict where the writers are going with these episodes. We very much know from Rogue One and Tony Gilroy's writing, he is not afraid to kill characters and he is not afraid to shock us. So this moment had the ultimate stakes, and I was really hoping that Clea was going to manage this because I didn't want her or Lonnie to be caught. I know Lonnie might be an ISB agent, but he is trying to do good and he is risking so much by double crossing the ISB. And I kind of loved how Mon Mothma accidentally ended up helping the rebellion in a way that she didn't even know by getting into that argument with Krennic, who waltzes in with the most amazing dress uniform, I have to admit. The sash and the cape really provided that extra sense of presence, and she really goes head to head with him. Mon Mothma and Krennic have it out over this piece of art where she's arguing over what he learned at the academy versus what she learned during her schooling, where one group's rebels are another group's terrorists. And it kind of felt like Krennic is maybe a little bit suspicious of Mon Mothma's allegiance to the Empire. She's obviously very outspoken. She's on probably some kind of watch list with the ISB. So, he's clearly happy to test her. But with Mon Mothma distracting Krennic, Scaldon, and everybody else, with Perrin looking very worried that this could actually end up into a real fight, Clea and Lonnie do manage to get out this listening device. But the tension throughout that entire sequence was just insanely good. And I loved how the production was using Clea literally bleeding for the rebellion as she's trying to unjam the listening device. You can see the sweat on Lonnie's brow. It just added to the realism of that moment.
No, it certainly did. I think, as you mentioned before, I think the way the tension's been written into every episode of this season has been sort of perfectly done by the team. Like I said, even when, yes, it is tension when people's lives are at stake and people's lives have been taken, but even here when sort of there's no battle, it's just they're trying to remove something and there's a lot of people in the room. There's sort of discussions taking place. It's things that could be boring, but the way it's written and then delivered by the cast, it's like really intriguing and really tense, which is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I think, do they suspect Mon as being part of the rebellion at this point? Like, probably, maybe not, but I think any senator who was sort of associated with the group that was sort of Mon, that was Bail Organa, that was Padme Amidala, sort of before the fall of the Republic, I think those sort of, let's just call them maybe left-leaning politicians. I think those are the people of the Empire will probably be like, these are the ones we'll have to watch because we know that they sort of believe in freedom, and obviously, although we're saying everyone's free, like the Emperor has just absolutely created the biggest sort of coup in the galaxy, biggest coup in the galaxy, and like these people aren't thick, so like they will be aware of what he's doing. If not straight away, certainly as things continue to go on, which as we know they do. Um, Obviously on Gorman, what was your thoughts on sort of Cassian's interaction with the rebels of Gorman?
Cassian felt like that seasoned soldier who knows what he's doing and is basically criticizing almost a young group of kids because the Gore just aren't soldiers. They're not rebels. They don't know what they're doing. They might not like the Empire, but at the same time, they don't know how to successfully stand up against the Empire. And Cassian just tells that to their faces. He admires their spirit. He admires that they're willing to speak out against the Empire and what they're doing on Gorman. But he can also see, because of his own experience and everything that he's gone through, that the Gore just, they have no idea, because they've lived peaceful, prosperous lives. They have no idea about the hardships that come with rebellion. And he rightly calls them out on it. I felt it really showed that how Cassian does care about people. Again, we're going into that idea of Saw Gerrera and Luthen do believe in some kind of sacrifice for the greater good, sacrifice for the greater cause, whereas Mon Mothma and Cassian are people's people. They see the effects that a rebellion would have on everyday lives, on individuals, and Cassian is naturally worried about that. So, although he's being very harsh to the Gore, at the same time he's doing it from a place of compassion.
Yeah, definitely. He doesn't want them doing things that they're not ready for, because then that's how A, they probably die, and B, the rebellion on Gorman will fail if they're not ready. What was your thoughts on sort of on what Cyril's doing on Gorman, and also his interactions with Coruscant, and how, and we're going to see later, but how it seems that Cyril's not necessarily getting all of the facts from Coruscant. He's only getting what he needs to do his job. And there's obviously the distance factor between him and Deidre here, which is playing on their minds, but then also this lack of information maybe as well.
I love how Cyril and Cassian are basically foils of each other because both have grown up without strong parental, well, fatherly figures in their lives, but Cassian has grown up into a person who fights back against oppression, who will stand up for himself, whereas Cyril is the complete opposite. He is quite weak-willed and he's constantly seeking approval. In a way, this task he's been assigned to on Gorman is a chance for him to prove himself. And he really is throwing himself into it completely. He's basically blended into the Gorman lifestyle. By this episode, we see him wearing a coat and a beret that feels like the Gorman fashion. He's using the Gorman hand gestures. While he might not know the language, he's tried to integrate himself in with the locals as much as he can. And that has earned him some of the respect of the Gorman front. But it's interesting that he doesn't really know what he's doing, because Deidre and Pendergast are keeping him in the dark. And at no point does Cyril stop to think why he's doing what he's doing. Yes, he knows that Deidre needs some kind of evidence of rebel activity, but he never stopped to question why, because he's always seeking that approval. He wants Pendergast's approval. He wants Deidre's approval. and to an extent he wants some of his mother's approval, because he doesn't have that self-esteem and inner confidence that Cassian has. So his actions on Ghorman, he doesn't realize the repercussions of what will eventually happen. But yeah, his return to Coruscant just felt, he and Deidre are just such a toxic couple, because while he might have escaped his mother, he's now at the whims of a woman who is using him. Deidre might feel something for Cyril, but she is using him for her greater promotion in the ISB, for being successful. And in a way, I strangely feel sorry for Cyril, because this is a man who could have done the right things, could have done good things, if only he'd had better influences in his life.
Definitely. And speaking of better influences, I think obviously Wilmot is here on Dakar. He sort of expressed that he wants to get back to sort of home in Cassian, I suppose. He's been told he has to stay until Pluty can do it exactly. Perform the activity without any worry. And then here we see Saw kills Pluty point blank range out of nowhere, comes out of nowhere. And pretty much when it goes to Wilmon, you're going to do it instead. And there's like no choice here. And you can sort of see Wilmon seems quite deflated, I would say. But what was your thoughts on on Saw's actions here, and just how, I suppose, barbaric and off the cuff it was? It was a cold-blooded kill, and also how the rest of the base didn't seem to like be shaken by it, as if A, it's normal activity, and B, good. If that's a trait, I'm glad he's dead.
That was a jump scare moment for sure. While Saw Gerrera has always been a little unhinged and unpredictable, even that was, as you said, it was barbaric. It came out of nowhere. And I'm still not convinced that Pluty was a traitor. I feel that Saw Gerrera may have been blinded by his own paranoia. So killing him may or may not have even been justified. It's really hard to say, because we didn't have enough exposition around Pluty's character to know whether he was a traitor or whether he just wanted confirmation about the Rhydonium line they were hitting to make sure that he could do the job successfully. But I completely agree that Saw Gerrera's band of guerrilla fighters were completely unsurprised by it. The lack of shock does indicate maybe that they are very much used to Saw Gerrera being unpredictable, and that no one is really safe within his forces. But it also hints that Saw Gerrera's group, they're almost a cult in a way. They all value him and look up to him as a leader, but nobody dares question him. Nobody dares go against him. And that feels much more like a cult than any other faction we've seen that ends up joining the rebellion. And it also ties in beautifully with that argument he later has with Mon Mothma in Rebels, where they basically fight about their different views of how the rebellion should be run. And this is literally a point blank example, because Mon Mothma would send someone to the brig, Mon Mothma would have someone interrogated. Saw Gerrera just kills them in cold blood. But it does leave Wilmon in this absolutely impossible situation. And considering he's one of the characters I didn't connect with as much during the first season, I did really feel for his situation within these episodes, because he truly is stuck between a rock and a hard place wherever he goes, and he just seems to keep on losing no matter what he does. And in a way, his character actually feels a little bit like Saw Gerrera, because He's sacrificed, he's given, and he keeps getting into situations where he just loses. So I found that quite interesting between Willman and Saw Gerrera as well.
I did as well. Left us with two thoughts. Like it's obviously left to be open to interpretation. Like, is Pluty a traitor? Saw Gerrera says he is, but like other than that, they don't give us any evidence to say that he is, which I think is still on purpose. And I think Saw does see something of himself in William, especially from like that first interaction we see, and then so I think there's that side of it where is he trying to keep Wilmon closer so that he can influence him because he knows that he can maybe create another version of himself within Willimon, but then also does he also know that like Wilmon's the best at that job, right? At stealing the Rhydonium and extracting it. So rather than having to show someone how to do it, but there still be a small percentage that he gets it wrong, I'm just going to stage this thing. I'm going to kill him and say he's a traitor. No one's going to question it. And it forces Wilmon to do it, which means A, I get more time with Wilmon to groom him. And then B, Wilmon's the best at it, so the chances of success goes up. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I definitely think that there is this element of Saw Gerrera that is almost possessive of Willman, not just because he is an asset and can steal the Rhydonium, but when we see that heist a bit later on as Willman is doing that exact task of stealing the Rhydonium from the Imperial lines, when Saw Gerrera is talking about his past to Willman, it almost seems like he's trying to build a bridge with this younger man. And he's talking about the terrible life experiences he's been through. There is no denying that Saw Gerrera has gone through more trauma than a character should. But so has Willman. I mean, he did lose his dad in that first season. He's lost people he's cared about on Ferrix. He's lost Brasso. He's constantly having to move between Cassian and these different rebel groups. So that interaction between Saw Gerrera and Willman did feel like Saw trying to make Willman almost into him. He's there saying, look at this Rhydonium, look at this precious gift you're stealing for me. You're no better than me, almost in a sense. But Saw Gerrera did seem really unhinged in that moment where he's interacted with Willman, because he's high on these Rhydonium fumes, and in a way he's almost incoherent in the way he's talking to Willman. He's flipping between his backstory, he's flipping between what Rhydonium represents. He references it as his sister at one point, and I think that's really highlighting the fragile state of mind Saw Gerrera is always in, not helped by Rhydonium fumes, which kind of sends Willman over the edge. There's too much pain in that moment. When he starts, screaming out that pain, I really did empathize with his character, because I think even in that moment, perhaps Willman realized, I'm not much different to Saw Gerrera, and this is a man who I literally just witnessed kill somebody in cold blood. And I don't think Willman wants to be that kind of person.
No, definitely. I think this is all changing Wilmon, like either for the better or for the worse, but it is having an effect on him. And I think this very much, that's why I think Saw is fully Saw here. I think when we see Saw in Rogue One, he sort of, when he asks sort of people questions and then they reply, he almost like doesn't answer back to their reply, he answers back to sort of himself, if that makes sense. I'm not saying he has voices in his head, because I don't think he does, but do you know what I mean? That sort of like, he hears what they say, then he goes back with like what he thinks about it rather than like what they've said, if that makes sense. I think that's fully on show here. Is there any other thoughts about episode 5? I have friends everywhere.
Again, just absolutely fantastic episode. And yeah, the fact that there's also pigeons now in Star Wars, because there's pigeons on Gorman, that is like the bit that the really small bit that really caught my attention, is the fact there's now pigeons in Star Wars. It felt a very light-hearted moment where they're on the tables in the square. Compared to all the darkness, there's little pigeons.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't mind pigeons because where I live up here in the northeast, you know, Newcastle's on the river, but like South Shields is a coastal town, and we have a lot of seagulls in the vicious little buggers. To be fair, and I have had seagulls like steal food off my hands and that walking down the street. So I'm glad there wasn't any seagulls in this because it probably would have triggered me to be a bit unhinged. But pigeons, I don't mind because they're nice and cute, and they'll come and eat your crumbs off the floor. But other than that, they're not harming you. But yeah, keep seagulls out of Star Wars is my message. Pigeons, yes. Seagulls, it's a big no. I don't know if you've ever had seagulls attack you, Kat, have you?
No, I've been very lucky that whenever I'm in Swansea or on the coast, the seagulls completely leave me alone. But that could also be because I'm happy to feed the seagulls myself. I will willingly share my food with the seagulls.
I think like where I live now, especially in like South Shields, which is a coastal town where I was born, actually, sort of just on the south side of the River Tyne. Um, they're sort of aware, they're in the town centre and like they watch for people coming out of like the McDonald's or the Greggs or like wherever it is, and like they watch to see when like food's available. And they'll come and get it. I've also saw seagulls eating dead pigeons on that street as well when I was younger. So yeah, the seagulls in the northeast of England are not to be trifled with because they've adapted. They're no longer sort of act like normal seagulls. They are very much hunter gatherers for everyone else's takeaway. And the big birds with sort of big claws and big beaks, they're powerful. So let's keep seagulls out of Star Wars. Yes, please. Moving on to the next episode, episode 6, which is What a Festive Evening. This is the last episode of this arc, the second arc of Andor Season 2. And Cassian insists that the Gorman rebels are unprepared, and he argues with Luthen upon learning that behind his back he attempted to persuade Bix to return to action. Luthen chastises him for his short-sighted vision and instead sends Vil and Cinta to help the rebels pull off the heist. Vil and Cinta fully reconcile. They rekindle their romance as well, which was good to see. And the heist is successful, but one of the fighters disobeys Vel's orders and brings a blaster only to accidentally kill Cinta when a passerby interferes, devastating Vel. At Skulden's party, Krennic and Mothma debate the ethics of war while Claire managed to extract the bug using Jung as a distraction, which what we've already discussed. And Bix breaks into Ghost's new office and uses his own torture device on him before leaving with Cassian, who remotely blows up the facility. So yeah, this episode sort of a lot happens in this episode, and it's sort of perfectly everything we've discussed, comes to fruition here. Hence why we've already talked about some of it, because it does sort of blend perfectly in and we get the resolutions. The biggest thing, I suppose, is that I think although Luthen sends Cassian there, he doesn't really care what Cassian thinks, right? He wants it to happen anyway. And that's why he sends in his backup. He sends in Vel and Cinta. What was your thoughts on Luthen's decision to do that? He's essentially he's going to sacrifice Gorman, right? Because he wants it to create havoc. He wants him to maybe die so that he can then use it to sort of fire up the rebellion in other parts of the galaxy. This is a side of Luthen that is a bit harsh, not quite so Guerrero harsh, but it is harsh. And what's your thoughts on sort of him sending Vil and Cinta? And what was your thoughts on again sort of the Gormans don't listen? And Vel's been very stern because it's just giving them the rules. And they don't listen to the rules, and straight away they kill somebody who's meant to be helping them. I had no sympathy for the Gormans here when they kill Cinta. So just talk us through your thoughts on Luthen ignoring Cassian and sending Vil and Cinta, and your thoughts on the whole heist.
Oh, that's a lot to break down, but let's start with Luthen, because again, it brought me back to that speech. That speech of his is just pure cinema from the series 1, and he talks about having to use the tools of his enemy, and that really is Gorman. It's the entire planet, because although Luthen doesn't know the significance of Ghorman to the Empire, he doesn't understand why they want Ghorman so much, because that is classified information about the calcite for the Death Star that Krennic is keeping under wraps. But he does know that it's important. And when Cassian said that the Ghor just weren't ready, they weren't soldiers, that any rebellion on the planet would end in disaster, Luthen says to him, then it will burn very brightly. And he's happy to see it burn. He's happy to strike that match because Ghorman is an important mid-rim planet. He knows that if anything happens to Ghorman, it will send a message to the rest of the galaxy. He is almost willing to make Ghorman a martyr for the benefit of the rebellion. And it is a dark choice that he makes to ignore Cassian's warning that the people will suffer. And Luthen sees it in this way that, yes, the people of Ghorman might suffer, but it's for the greater good of the entire galaxy. Again, it's that idea of sacrifice. And here, it's not just sacrificing a person or group of people, it's literally sacrificing an entire planet. And it is a harsh choice, but it's the one Luthen makes. And I think this could be one of the reasons that Luthen knows he could never lead the rebellion. He is just a tool to incite the rebellion. Luthen works with people's anger. Luthen works with people who are incendiary against the Empire. But he knows that he is not bringing together a force that could fight together, could work as an army. That's not Luthen's purpose. And I think that very much shows with the choices he makes surrounding Ghorman. And then he sends Val and Cinta to rally the Ghorman front. And they see exactly what Cassian saw. They see a group of people who are angry at the Empire, who want to do something, but they really have no idea what they're doing. They're inexperienced and to an extent arrogant. Although the Imperial propaganda machine has painted Ghorman as this arrogant, defiant nation, sadly, they were only using some whispers of things that were already there. The Ghor do come across as arrogant because when Val and Cinta are coming up with the plan to make the heist go well, they are providing useful information. They are setting out very reasonable rules and trying to establish a chain of command, which the Ghor immediately don't like. They don't like this outside influence. And one of them says that they don't want to take orders from strangers. Well, that's what you signed up for when you wanted to be part of any kind of rebel movement. You're going to be working with people who you might not necessarily like or might not necessarily know, but if you want to benefit your people, then you just have to go along with it. And I think that's the whole issue of the Ghor, is that they are so proud of their own people, of their own nation, that they're a little bit blinded. And that's what comes across, that arrogance. Because they do have these understandably strong cultural heritage, but it's what basically sets up this mission to fail before it even began. I liked how Cinta, when she talks to Val later, is warning Val that she's a little bit unsure about some of the potential partisans joining them, and that they should adjust accordingly. So even Cinta can see it, that she's worried about some of the Ghor striking off on their own, which is terrible in a team plan. But why is it that any romance in Star Wars always ends in tragedy?
Star Wars is
Val did
tragedy.
not deserve that. So when the heist is underway, I kind of I kind of was expecting something to go badly because it was going too well. Everything was going to plan. Their timings were perfect. They knocked out the driver easily, and nobody was alarmed because the partisans had cleared the streets. But then Val has to go off looking for one of the group, leaving Cinta alone with the rest. And I think it's Sam is the cocky one who decided to bring a blaster that he has clearly never shot in his life before and doesn't know how to aim to save his life. And it all goes horribly wrong. And yes, I wanted to slap him. How Val didn't slap him, I have no idea. She verbally destroyed him, which he deserved. But how she didn't actually physically get into some kind of altercation with him, I don't know. I would not have been the stronger person there. I would have absolutely slapped him with the blaster.
No, definitely. I think one thing you did say at the beginning there was obviously Luthen being sort of, he's integral in sort of putting the pieces together for this rebellion, you could say. But you're right, he's not a leader. And like someone like Mon is, I think that's why he's doing the dirty things so that Mon can be the leader. So when he takes care of Tay, obviously Mon doesn't like it, but he doesn't really give her a choice and he's vague about it. But he's doing those things so that the real leaders can sort of not get their hands dirty and still lead, if that makes sense. And essentially so that the good people don't get corrupted. He's sort of doing the corrupting, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I love the tension building during this heist. I think when the civilian who sort of gets involved, who later we see, actually does join the group of rebels on Gorn, but when he gets involved, you sort of think, my first thought was, oh, this guy's going to shoot him by accident. There's going to be a squabble here. The blaster's going to go off. He's going to kill him by accident, and that's going to be like the drama. But then obviously that was tight enough. And then that doesn't happen, and then we get, obviously he fires the blaster off, and it's Cinta, who goes. And Star Wars is tragedy, as I said. And I think the fact that this episode we finally bring these two characters back together and we re-establish the romance. We make sure we do that in the story, and then we have Cinta go again. It's just a brilliant build of tension and tragedy that is delivered. And then sort of the other big thing at the end of this episode is, of course, Bix and Cassian seem to be stronger than ever together. One thing we haven't spoken about is sort of, while Cassian's been away, Bix has sort of been dabbling in some narcotics to maybe, dull the pain of the torture she's been through and that mental anguish. But once Cassian's here and they have a conversation, they seem to be back as sort of an unbreakable team. And they go and destroy Ghost, who is, of course, he's the reason why she has this mental anguish. And they're in it together. So what was your thoughts on sort of how Luthen's actions have brought Cassian and Bix together seemingly stronger than ever? And what was your thoughts on, obviously, what they do to Ghost?
Oh, my poor baby girl Bix. She has been through too much. Too much. And honestly, her healing journey and mental health representation has just been so good over this arc because she has these PTSD like symptoms with flashbacks, with nightmares, dissociation. She's struggling to tell her nightmares from reality and feels like she's reliving the torture that she underwent. So when she's isolated on Coruscant and Cassian isn't there, she does turn to some form of drug to help her sleep or dull the nightmares. Which, when Luthen comes to check on her, he warns her against. He says that they might work for a time, but then the nightmares come back stronger than ever. And initially I was skeptical of Luthen coming to see Bix because I thought he's just coming in to check on an asset. Because while Cassian is out helping the rebellion, Bix is she's not being useful in the eyes of Luthen. And it did feel initially like he was there to confront her about that. But at the same time, I feel that maybe he was weirdly showing that he cared, because he was trying to tell Bix in his own way that she needed to work to overcome what had happened in her past, and that drugs weren't the answer. They weren't the coping mechanism that she should be relying on. So that interaction, you could read it two ways, and I think that's what was so brilliant about that writing, is that you could read it in those two ways of, it's either Luthen coming to check in on an asset, or it's actually Luthen showing he cares in his own roundabout way. But for Bix to overcome everything she's been through, it takes so much strength, so much resilience. And a part of that for her, I think, has always been getting revenge. Because Ghost, it's just this monster. He is a psychopath. He doesn't feel anything. And when, I don't know whether Luthen presented them with this opportunity, or if Bix and Cassian actually planned this out themselves. But when she attacks him and does strap him into that torture chair, I was literally cheering her on, because this was such a turning point for her character, for her healing journey. And the only thing that was kept going through my mind was, please let this not be another dream of Bix's. And it was kind of the explosion with Cassian that confirmed to me that this wasn't a dream and this had really happened. But I just, it was just such an important moment for Bix to do that. And it felt like when she was walking towards the camera with Cassian, she was back in the present moment. She had literally destroyed that element of her past so that she could almost be reborn. I think the flame motif could almost be seen as a phoenix motif for Bix. She's reborn in that moment and ready to fight once again for the rebellion. I thought it was just an epic finale.
No, it was awesome. I think what I got was, obviously, when they come out, I got a sense of sort of Bix had took her story back, she took her life back. She took control of sort of. Doesn't change the fact that those things happened to her, but I feel she sort of took control and took the fear away, which was awesome to see. And I think, even if the torture didn't kill Ghost, then certainly his whole office getting blown up would. I think we've pretty much covered everything in these 3 episodes. I don't know if there's anything from this 3rd episode that you want to cover that we haven't.
I think the only thing that I would mention is probably that Pendergast dropped my favorite line of the episode of the series so far, which is when Hirt is so excited to be reassigned, and Pendergast says, "Calibrate your enthusiasm." I need that on a T-shirt. I need that on a mug. I need that on a pin.
Well, anybody who wants to make those up and send the cat, she'll be eternally grateful. Yes, I think he's been like, because he's sort of like Deidre's mentor, right? But he's also not. He's a high-ranking ISB agent. He is pulling strings. And it was good to see him sort of exercising his will here. Overall, I think, if the first arc was about setting up where our characters are 1 year later, and then putting them through some things that are going to cause a lot of character building and define them in the future, I think this arc here, 1 year later from that, is sort of saying, yes, it's 1 year later from that traumatic time, but they're still feeling the effects of those things. The body will forever, the life-changing events, but they're very much moving forward. I think it's sort of is what we see here. Any last thoughts on sort of any of the first 6 episodes?
just that they have been equally as amazing as each other. Every episode I have just loved by itself, but also by the wide story it's telling. And there are some episodes I will actually wait. I'll spread it out. They come out on Wednesday, but I'll watch them up until Friday. But with this arc, I think I watched them all at once because I just couldn't have those pauses between each episode. The tension is too much.
The tension is huge. I think it reminds me of like the films of Denis Villeneuve, who obviously he did just do Dune 1 and 2, but he did like Sicario and movies like that, Arrival, and he's a master at building tension with just like almost nothing happening, just with sort of camera angles and music. And I think this show's similar but different. It's in the writing and in how the characters are doing things, as well as camera work and music as well. But I think it's just a masterclass in tension being built. And I think the next 3 episodes is going to be 1 year later again. I think that's going to be building tension to another level. And I think we know we're going towards Rogue One, which is where the tension's at its most highest. And I think each arc we're building the tension higher and higher and higher. We're turning the notch up. So there's 2 more arcs left tonight, so I'm excited to see just how much tension that goes. And I just hope that our nerves can take it. I suppose it's cool because we know what happens to Cassian, right? We know the outcome of that in Rogue One, but the other characters we don't necessarily know what happens to them. So could there be more death, more tragedy on the horizon? It is Star Wars, so probably, but who will it be? We will have to watch to find out. Any closing thoughts on anything Star Wars and related, Kat, before we wrap things up?
It's wonderful having basically a Star Wars movie almost every week, and the fact that this season is tonally and visually different to the first season, but is just as strong in the writing, I think is genuinely so impressive. Second seasons are tough, especially considering Andor season 1 set up such high expectations, and each of these episodes is dealing with very almost, it might be set in a galaxy far, far away, but it is dealing with uh, ideas and issues that are very pertinent to modern culture. And the way it's written and combining those issues into this story is incredible.
I did see something really cool on social media this week. So I don't know if you remember seeing sort of the original teaser posters for Star Wars uh, in the early in the 70s, and it was like all of this could be happening right now, like in a galaxy far, far away.
Mm.
And that was it could be happening right now. And I saw one today in regards to Andor, what's happening with the government and the ISB and the control they're trying to get. And it was like all this could be happening like right now. And it was like sort of insinuating what's happening around the world when you look at sort of the increase in sort of far right parties across the world getting in. If you look at Trump in America and look what's happened almost in Canada. Luckily, it didn't because of Trump sort of attacking Canada verbally, letting that not happening. But in Germany and France, just here in the UK, we've seen reform sort of win some local council elections. So I think Star Wars has always been political. I know some people like to say it's not, but if you speak to George Lucas about it, it was very much George Lucas. Star Wars was about sort of the the Vietnam War and the situation sort of the world was in. So it's always been political. So that was very interesting, I thought, and I don't think it's been done on purpose. I think, but it's funny how these things sort of coincide. Back to Star Wars, though. One thing me and Jason spoke about, obviously me and Jason reviewed the first 3 episodes on our last episode. We spoke about at the end how B2MO got sort of left behind. And we, at the end of that episode, we talked about how would they go back and get him, but no B2MO here. So B2MO is hopefully safe and sound. Are you worried about B2MO? Do you hope he's okay, Kat?
Well, obviously, I hope that he's okay, but I'm also thinking that him being away from Cassian is probably the safest he can be, because the ISB aren't going to be hunting down this precious little droid, and hopefully he's living his best life chasing children around on Mina Rao and enjoying the countryside.
Hopefully, it's one of the things where like it's probably best for him, but also if you look at how sad he was in that first 3 episodes when Cassian wasn't there, he was constantly talking about Cassian, wasn't he? And the fact that Cassian hasn't come back, it's a bit tragic for B2MO, bless him. But yeah, that brings it into our episode. Any final messages, and where can the people find you on social media, Kat?
I just thought it was wonderful speaking about this incredible series. And you can find me at Cat Kylo on Twitter, where I'm always happy to talk anything Star Wars, Kylo Ren, or Lego related.
And you can find myself on X, formerly known as Twitter, and on Instagram at Geordie Jedi Pete. You can also find the podcast on X at Boars Star, and you can find the podcast everywhere else, including YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook at Star Wars Podcast. If you are listening on Apple Music or Spotify, please leave us a 5-star review, a lovely little sentence. It keeps us smiling all week, only takes you a few moments, and it does help people find the show. If you're listening on any of the other wonderful podcast applications out there, there is a lot now as podcasts have taken over the world, and there's a feature to leave a review. Again, leave us a top review, as many stars as you can, a lovely sentence. It keeps us smiling all week, and it only takes you a few moments, and it does help people find the show. And if you are leaving reviews, do share them with us on social media, and we might send you out a little goodie pack. But that brings an end to this episode. May the Force be with you all, and remember, always tell that to Ganja Club.